Today's gospel lesson, we are presented with a contrast between the life of a man who was wealthy, who is unnamed, and another who was in poverty, whose name we know as Lazarus, and who should not be confused with the Lazarus of Bethany. Christ's teaching found in St. Luke's Gospel is commonly known as the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. And his purpose in presenting this lesson was not to make us feel bad about being blessed with good things in this life and have pity upon poor people. His desire was to move us into action and to help us understand that the personal destiny of all of us begins with our attitude and the virtuous actions of our daily life, as we've been learning in our Bible study about all those who exemplified that virtue, such as Noah and now Abraham. In St. Paul's first letter to Timothy in chapter 6, verse 7, St. Paul reminds us, quote, "For we brought nothing into this world, and we can take nothing out of it," unquote. Going on in verses 8 through 10, he says, quote, "But if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. Some, eager for wealth, fall into temptation and a trap, and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge them into ruin and destruction," unquote. Then he says, quote, "For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Some," he says, "eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs," unquote. You know, from time to time, you and I have to honestly ask ourselves, and it's probably best that we do at the end or the close of every year, how much is enough? We have to draw a distinction between what we and our families truly need from the things that we want, recognizing our values and priorities. If you, like me, have lived long enough, it's not difficult to see how the fluctuation of interest rates and the stock market is like a ping pong ball. I remember well when we began construction on this building you are now in. Interest rates had fallen from 6%, had fallen to 6% from 12%. That was in the early 90s. We thought that was fantastic. However, at that time, the financing of this building, listen closely, was based on personal investments made to our bank as collateral during what was called a recession, enabling us to have a line of credit and 6% interest earned on CDs ranging from $50,000 to $100,000 donated by these parishioners who own the principal of their investment in St. Michael Church. And by the way, Marcel, your mother was one of them, as our founder. This assembly hall was built at a time when no one, and I mean no one, was contracting anything for construction in the San Fernando Valley. In fact, we had contractors who were out of work that actually lived 24 hours a day on our property. Because they were doing the work, they could hire no one. And so we had pros that put up the trusses of this building. And I got phone calls even from rabbis saying, how are you getting this done? It was called creative financing by the Maluf family, who stepped up to the plate to get the job done. And they're doing it again. You know, in life there are all kinds of grief. One type of grief moves a person beyond sorrow and sadness. It can lead to feelings of regret that can lead to despair. And very sadly, there are many who are taking their lives today because of this kind of grief. It can therefore be very dangerous to a person's soul if we don't know how to attend to our spiritual life. This is the reason why our Lord said, "What do you profit if you gain the whole world and lose your own soul?" It has everything to do with how we can become attached to temporal things and how they matter so much to us. And God forbid, living a life with feelings of entitlement, as many do. There is a great deal about life that is just simply not fair. You know that. I know that. And Christ's coming was neither to make us feel better or to abolish suffering. His coming, that we will celebrate in a couple of months, was to truly enter suffering and to fill it with himself. I repeat. He came to fully enter suffering and to fill it with himself. And we have to identify with him, whatever the price. He made all suffering redemptive, meaning a way of salvation. If we choose him over all else, it was the means and is the means by which we discover how to live. Saint Zenobius, who we commemorate today with his sister Zenobia, said this, quote, "Life without Christ is not life. It is death. And death for Christ's sake is not death, but life." These words are not a riddle. They speak of a spiritual reality that can only be realized by mature thinkers. You and I can easily read today's lesson and identify with Lazarus as a man on the street. However, it would help us in our day, especially on this, the final Sunday of Youth Month. God forbid that this be the final Sunday of Youth Month. I mean, you know, for Father Timothy, every month is Youth Month, Women's Month, you name it. We need to recognize that today at least 700,000 adolescent minors, ages 13 to 17, experience a form of homelessness in the course of 1 year. That's right. That is 1 out of every 30 adolescent minors who are homeless. In total, at least 4.2 million young people experience a form of homelessness in a given year, from living on a couch from home to home or living on the street in the United States of America. Now, you and I can reach our own conclusion, as you probably already have. Why is this happening? However, none of us are going to turn the clock back on the reality of what we will either recognize or want to ignore. Covenant House in Los Angeles is a charity that receives support from our archdiocese Food for the Hungry People campaign every year. Covenant House reports that, quote, behind the face of every homeless young person is a breathtaking story. A teenage boy abused by his alcoholic parent, a pregnant girl rejected by her guardian, or a teenager trying to escape gang membership, or a life of forced prostitution. In case after case, Covenant House reports, the main cause of youth homelessness is physical, sexual, or emotional abuse from parents or guardians. And as shocking as it may sound, the facts are that 57% of homeless children spend at least one day every month without food. What you and I may have thought unimaginable is in fact a reality today. And so if it might be easier for us to read today's lesson in terms of the person on the street, it would even be more difficult for those of us who value family life and understand what it means to raise children in our day to realize how much of a human tragedy we are facing in what we have prided ourselves in belonging to the wealthiest and most prosperous nation in history. Sadly, these social problems will not be fixed with a handout. However, for some who are desperate, it might mean an extra meal. As we near the National Thanksgiving holiday, it helps us to recognize what it means to value and treasure what are God's imperishable spiritual gifts and how we acquire them. Just as many temporal and perishable gifts are worked for, spiritual gifts, and by gifts I mean virtues, are like temporal and perishable gifts because they are not like temporal or perishable gifts because they are eternal and imperishable. They consist of eternal qualities of a spiritual life that remain with us forever. Gifts that can never be stolen or taken away from us. Now, it must be said that for you and I, we may easily and perhaps even unintentionally consider them something that we have acquired based upon our emotions and feelings. And that's where we have to be very careful. You and I should never substitute God's call to serve others with our emotions and feelings. You and I are called by God to take action and to do what we can do to make a difference in the lives of others, especially members of our own family. And so in conclusion, today's gospel tells us people's spiritual lives can be formed and shaped by both wealth and poverty. Also, that being wealthy or poor can often manifest certain attitudes and behavior. Second, that these attitudes and behavior are manifested among those whose life move from poverty to wealth and from wealth to poverty. Very often, whether or not someone worked to earn their wealth or simply inherited wealth is very, very telling. However, whether a person is considered rich or poor in this life, each can be virtuous, desirous to love God, and found to do His will. But the true test of righteous virtue for a rich or poor person is one's sincerity and humility. And while you and I desire to be self-sufficient, independent, healthy, and prosperous, there's nothing wrong with that. And would also desire that for our children. We are all dependent upon God, and there's no denying it. The virtue of humility is based on the foundation of Christian love. Repeat. The virtue of humility is based on the foundation of Christian love, demonstrated by Christ's humility, who came loving us, sent from the Father. That's our model. That's what Christmas is about. It's not that sublime, cute kid who's in a manger among dumb beasts and animals, rejected by men. It is no different. Love begins with humility, otherwise it's fraudulent. Love always begins with humility, or it's fraudulent. It's no different to how we understand God, who sent his Son to die for us. It's a real test and challenge as to whether or not we really believe that God came to suffer and die for us. In fact, today's lesson concludes with a remarkable point that may even be perceived as sarcastic. Did you hear it? The rich man who ends up in torment, realizing what he failed to do, cries out to Abraham and says, I beg you, Father Abraham, send to my father's house. Send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, so they may warn him, so that they will also not come to this place of torment. And Abraham said, they have Moses and the prophets. Let them hear him. And he said, no, Father Abraham. But if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent. To which he says, if they do not hear Moses and the prophets, which, by the way, we're studying each Tuesday night, neither will they be convinced if someone were to be risen from the dead. Now, what do you think he was saying? Love manifests itself in good works and initiatives of compassion. It also is the basis of what any believer in Jesus Christ must practice: a good confession and the true motive of love. The opposite is arrogance, selfishness, a sense of entitlement, greed, hatred, all of which are warned by our tradition, beginning with Christ, the apostles, and the Holy Fathers. That warning comes with pointing to consequences. May we never be deceived or deluded, especially by what meets the eye, and may we earnestly commit to doing what we can in the coming season of the Advent fast by actively serving others. That's right, I said a fast. I mean, you would think that with Christmas coming, there would be lots of parties and celebrations, as you and I know there are. However, our tradition has prescribed, as in the ancient days, a fast for a reason, contrary to our culture. I repeat, the 12 days of Christmas is not before Christmas. It's from Christmas to Theophany, when there is no fasting. You know, on the first day of Christmas, that's Christmas Day. That's when the gifts are given each day. Prior to that time, we prepare. And we are involved in good works, prayer, and fasting. That's what's prescribed by the church. And so we have many opportunities. Cindy Tamush, our charitable coordinator, is collecting food for our local shelter loaves and distribution point loaves and fishes. We will, God willing, when we expand and have this facility available, expand to join with St. Nicholas as a distribution point with ongoing, regular food things for needy in our community. We've already met as a committee of people of various roles in the parish. And second, we have our annual toy collection, which Brittany Agelat is in charge of. The tree, our Christmas tree, will be up by Thanksgiving. And under it, new toys will be brought for the distribution, I'm told, this year to children of unwed mothers in a mission in Pasadena. So we hope, besides just these, but many opportunities of service, especially in a time of economic stress for many families, you will take into consideration members of your family, if not those of our community and those beyond, who may need help during this season. Christ is in our midst.
He is in our midst.